the lion who fell on the patrol path. The rain beat down mercilessly that night, turning the dirt paths of the reserve into slippery mud trails. Daniel Hayes had been a forest ranger for over 20 years now, but nights like these still filled him with a peculiar mixture of dread and reverence. The African wilderness transformed under the torrential downpour, becoming both more dangerous and more vulnerable simultaneously. His patrol jeep's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the curtain of rain ahead. Though his body ached from the long day's work, Daniel remained vigilant. These rainy nights were prime opportunities for poachers. The sound of rainfall masked their movements, and fewer rangers were willing to brave the elements. As he navigated a particularly treacherous bend in the path, the headlight swept across something unusual on the trail ahead. Daniel slowed the vehicle to a crawl, squinting through the rain-streaked windshield. "What in the world?" he muttered, reaching for his flashlight. There, collapsed in the middle of the path, lay the massive form of a male lion. Even from inside the vehicle, Daniel could see the labored rise and fall of its ribcage. The creature was alive, but barely. Daniel's heart raced. Protocol dictated that he should contact wildlife services immediately. They would send a veterinarian team by morning. But by then, given the lion's condition and the relentless rain, it might be too late. He inched the vehicle closer, shining his powerful flashlight directly on the suffering beast. The lion made no attempt to move, didn't even raise its head at the approaching light. As Daniel studied the animal more carefully, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A distinctive scar ran across the lion's face, from just above the right eye down to its jaw. "It can't be," Daniel whispered, memories flooding back from 15 years ago. It had been Daniel's first year as a ranger. He was still learning the ropes when he'd stumbled upon poachers who had killed a lioness, leaving her tiny cub wounded and alone. Against regulations, the young ranger had taken the cub to his outpost cabin, treating a deep cut across its face, the very same scar he was looking at now. For 2 weeks, he had nursed the cub in secret, knowing that his superiors would have insisted on sending it to a wildlife facility far from its home territory. Daniel believed the young lion deserved a chance to return to the wild, to its rightful place. When the cub recovered, Daniel had released it near a pride that he knew had recently accepted other orphaned cubs. He had watched from a distance as the small lion cautiously approached the pride, eventually being accepted by the lionesses. That day had cemented Daniel's dedication to his work, reinforcing his belief that every creature deserved compassion and a fighting chance. Over the years, he had occasionally spotted a male lion with that distinctive facial scar. Each sighting filled him with quiet pride, watching as the once vulnerable cub grew into a magnificent apex predator. Eventually, the lion had established his own territory on the far side of the reserve, and Daniel's sightings became increasingly rare. And now, here he was, the same lion, no longer in his prime, lying broken in the mud. Daniel turned off the engine and sat motionless, rain drumming on the roof of his vehicle. Every safety protocol, every regulation, every bit of training told him to keep his distance, call it in, and wait for the proper authorities. But something deeper pulled at him, a connection forged 15 years ago, a responsibility that transcended rulebooks. With a deep breath, Daniel grabbed his emergency medical kit and stepped out into the downpour. The mud sucked at his boots as he approached the fallen king cautiously, speaking in low, soothing tones. "I know you," he said softly, kneeling at a safe distance. "And once long ago, you knew me too." The lion's ice amber jewels, dulled by pain, shifted slightly to focus on Daniel. No recognition showed in them, just the wariness of a wild animal in distress. Daniel moved slowly, his experienced gaze assessing the lion's condition. No visible wounds marked the magnificent creature, but its breathing was shallow and irregular. Daniel suspected poisoning, a tactic increasingly used by poachers, who left tainted meat for predators, returning later for their valuable parts. A clap of thunder shook the sky, and Daniel made his decision. He couldn't leave this lion his Lionto die in the mud. He would take him back to his cabin, regulations be damned. Getting nearly 500 pounds of semi-conscious predator into his vehicle proved a monumental task. Using a tarp and every ounce of strength he possessed, Daniel managed to create a makeshift sled and, inch by agonizing inch, pull the lion into the back of his modified Jeep. Throughout the ordeal, the lion offered no resistance, a testament to how gravely ill it truly was. As Daniel secured the rear compartment and climbed back into the driver's seat, soaked to the bone and shivering, he knew his career would be over if anyone discovered what he'd done. But looking back at the magnificent creature now lying in his vehicle, Daniel couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. Some debts transcended human rules. Some connections couldn't be explained by rational thought. The journey back to his cabin was tense, with Daniel constantly checking his rearview mirror to ensure the lion remained stable. His mind raced through his limited options. He had some basic veterinary supplies and knowledge enough to treat minor injuries in the field, but poisoning required specific antidotes. The cabin appeared through the rain-swept darkness, a small, sturdy structure at the edge of the reserve. Daniel had specifically requested this remote posting, preferring the solitude of the wilderness to the company of people. Tonight, that isolation was a blessing. "Hang in there, old friend," he murmured, as he parked as close to the door as possible. Once inside, Daniel transformed his living room into a makeshift treatment area. Using the tarp again, he managed to drag the lion onto the floor near the fireplace. The animal's eyes fluttered open occasionally, regarding Daniel with a mixture of confusion and resignation. Working methodically, Daniel mixed activated charcoal with water, a universal treatment for many types of poisoning. The challenge would be getting the lion to swallow it. With a makeshift tube fashioned from equipment in his medical kit, Daniel carefully administered the solution, speaking constantly in a gentle tone. "I remember when you were small enough to fit in my lap," he said, working with focused precision. "You were fierce even then, a fighter. I need you to fight now." Hour after hour, Daniel worked tirelessly. He administered fluids to combat dehydration, kept the lion warm, and watched vigilantly for any change in condition. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder punctuating the night like artillery fire. As dawn approached, the rain finally began to subside, and with it, something in the lion's demeanor changed. His breathing became more regular, his eyes more alert. When Daniel approached with more fluids, the lion raised his head, slightly, small movement that filled Daniel with immeasurable hope. "There you are," Daniel said softly, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Welcome back." By midday, the improvement was undeniable. The lion was now fully conscious, though still weak. He watched Daniel's movements around the cabin with alert eyes, neither aggressive nor particularly frightened, simply observant, as if assessing this strange situation he found himself in. Daniel kept his distance now that the lion was more aware, preparing a mixture of water and raw meat from his freezer. He placed the bowl within reach of the recovering predator, then retreated to the other side of the room. "I don't expect you to remember me," Daniel said, watching as the lion cautiously began to drink, "but I've never forgotten you." As the hours passed, Daniel realized he faced a new problem. The lion was recovering too quickly perhaps. Soon it would regain its strength, and a healthy male lion was not something that could remain hidden in a cabin. He needed to return the animal to the wild before anyone discovered what he had done. But Daniel also knew that releasing the lion too soon could be a death sentence. He needed at least another day or two of observation to ensure the poison had truly left the animal's system. That night, Daniel slept in fits and starts, always with one eye on his dangerous houseguest. The lion, for his part, seemed content to rest by the dying embers of the fire, occasionally lifting his head when Daniel moved about. By morning of the second day, the lion was standing, albeit unsteadily. He paced the confines of the cabin with increasing confidence, his magnificent mane catching the sunlight that streamed through the windows. Daniel kept a respectful distance, knowing that the wild animal's tolerance had limits. "Tomorrow," Daniel promised, watching the lion from across the room. "Tomorrow, I'll take you home." That evening, as Daniel prepared for his final night with the recovering lion, the sound of an approaching vehicle shattered the peaceful atmosphere. No one was scheduled to visit the remote outpost, which meant trouble. Peering through the window, Daniel's worst fears were confirmed. 3 mud-splattered trucks were approaching Poachers, undoubtedly drawn to this section of the reserve by recent lion sightings. Daniel had been tracking a suspected poaching ring for months, but had never expected them to be so bold as to approach a ranger's cabin. Daniel reached for his radio to call for backup, only to find it dead. The storm must have damaged the communications tower. He was completely alone, facing multiple armed men, with a recovering predator in his living room. As the trucks drew closer, Daniel made a split-second decision. He opened the back door of his cabin, the one that led directly into the dense brush that surrounded the clearing, and then retreated to the front of the cabin, rifle in hand. The lion, sensing the tension, rose to his feet, a low growl building in his throat. "You should go," Daniel whispered urgently, gesturing toward the open door. "They've come for animals like you." Whether by instinct or understanding, the lion moved cautiously toward the exit, disappearing into the gathering twilight just as the first truck pulled into the clearing. Daniel stepped onto his porch, rifle held visibly but not threateningly. He counted 6 men exiting the vehicle armed, all looking much too comfortable with their weapons. "This is protected land," Daniel called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You're trespassing." The leader of the group, a tall man with a jagged scar across his neck, smiled coldly. "We're just lost travelers, Ranger, looking for directions." "The main road is 20 miles south," Daniel replied evenly. "I suggest you find it before nightfall." The tension in the air was palpable. Daniel knew they didn't believe his ignorance of their true purpose, just as he didn't believe their cover story. A dangerous impasse had been reached. "Perhaps we could come inside," the leader suggested, taking a step forward. "Discuss our navigation options." "I'm afraid my cabin's not fit for visitors," Daniel countered, not moving from his position. The leader's fake smile disappeared. "I don't think you understand the situation, Ranger. We're coming inside one way or another." In that moment, Daniel realized their true intent. They weren't just passing through, they had come specifically for him. Perhaps they had identified him as the ranger tracking their operations, or maybe they simply wanted to eliminate any witnesses to their presence in this section of the reserve. Either way, the odds were not in his favor. As the men spread out, clearly preparing to rush him, a sound emerged from the darkening forest behind the cabin, a deep, resonant roar that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Everyone froze. From the shadows at the edge of the clearing emerged the lion, no longer weak or unsteady, but moving with deadly purpose. His amber eyes reflected the last light of day as he positioned himself beside Daniel, facing the stunned poachers. Time seemed suspended as human and animal stood side by side, united against a common threat. The poachers' expressions transformed from confidence to uncertainty to outright fear as the lion let out another thunderous roar. The standoff lasted only seconds before the poachers broke, scrambling back to their vehicles in panic. Engines roared to life, and the trucks reversed hastily, nearly colliding with each other in their desperate retreat. As quickly as they had appeared, they were gone, leaving only swirling dust and tire tracks in the clearing. Daniel stood motionless on the porch, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. Beside him, the lion remained, his massive body radiating heat in the cooling evening air. Slowly, carefully, Daniel turned to face his unexpected defender. The lion regarded him calmly, that distinctive scar clearly visible across his regal face. In that moment, something passed between thema recognition, an understanding that transcended the barriers of species. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, voice thick with emotion. The lion held his gaze for a long moment, then turned toward the forest. At the edge of the trees, he paused, looking back once more at the human who had twice saved his life. Then, with the fluid grace that made lions the true kings of the wilderness, he disappeared into the gathering darkness. The next morning, Daniel reported the poacher incident through official channels, though he carefully omitted the details about his feline protector. Search parties were organized, but the poachers had vanished, at least for the time being. In the weeks that followed, Daniel often thought about that rain-soaked night and the extraordinary connection he had shared with a creature he had once held in his arms as a cub. He found himself scanning the horizon during his patrols, hoping for a glimpse of a scarred face and magnificent mane. One evening, as sunset painted the savanna in shades of gold and crimson, Daniel's binoculars caught movement on a distant ridge. There, silhouetted against the dying light, stood a male lion, the lion surveying his domain with regal confidence. As if sensing Daniel's gaze, the lion turned, looking directly toward him across the distance that separated them. For a brief moment, two worlds connected once more. Daniel lowered his binoculars, a smile spreading across his weather-worn face. No words were needed for the understanding that existed between thema bond formed through compassion freely given and returned when least expected. In a world that often emphasized the divisions between humanity and the natural world, their story stood as testament to a deeper truth, that compassion creates bridges where none seemed possible, and that kindness, once offered, can return in ways we could never anticipate. The lion turned away, disappearing over the ridge to continue his solitary patrol. Daniel watched until the last glint of sunlight on tawny fur vanished from sight. He knew they might never cross paths again, yet something profound and permanent had been exchanged between thema reminder that in acts of compassion, we not only transform the lives we touch, but are ourselves transformed in return. As darkness settled over the savanna, Daniel started his jeep and began the journey back to his cabin, carrying with him the quiet certainty that some connections transcend the boundaries we create between species, between wilderness and civilization, between one heart and another. In the end, it was not so much that he had saved a lion, or that a lion had saved him, but that they had, in their brief encounters across the years, reminded each other of a simple, eternal truth: that compassion freely given is the most powerful force in all of nature.